Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Right, brilliant. I think I lost you all for a second there. Apologies, but I'm back. Apologies for that. My Zoom kind of had a bit of a hiccup. So as I was saying, if you're going to ask a question, please use the chat function. But when we come to ask a question, please make sure, if you are happy to, that your camera is on, because it would be great to see you. So apologies for that, slight gremlins in the works, but without further ado, let's move on to our first speaker. He's going to talk about data security and privacy in the new world of cloud. Paul McCormack is founder and CEO of Corman and advisor to Protegrity. Paul is a solicitor and attorney specializing across data privacy, cybersecurity, and digital technology. And he's working with Corman, it's a technology development business, helping companies to navigate the complexity of the laws, and also working to enable the use of data in a compliant and secure manner. He's a regular speaker on data protection, digital and cybersecurity related issues. And it's great to have you with us representing both Corman and Protegrity. So Paul, over to you, and the floor is yours. Thank you.
Sue, thank you, and good morning, everyone. Well, I hope this will be a sort of an interesting and to the extent we can make this engaging an interactive session. It'd be great to obviously have questions as we go through the topic, because it's quite a broad area and something that obviously is very close to the areas that we work across from a Corman perspective and also from a Protegrity perspective. But really what we want to talk about today is data security and privacy in the new world of cloud. So as I was thinking about this topic ahead of today's deep dive, I was sort of thinking about, really what do we mean by the new world of cloud? And fundamentally, cloud in itself, as those on the call will have different perspectives, but certainly the definition of cloud is pretty well known and understood as we sort of sit here today. But I guess really when we think about this sort of new world of cloud, the question that sort of arose to me was, is this a new world? Is this a new concept that we're grappling with? What is the new concept? What are the issues when considering the cloud, and certainly in the context of security versus privacy? So what I'd like to sort of explore today is the differences of those different considerations from a technical and from a legal perspective, and sort of hopefully help navigate what we see in the context of adoption of cloud, migration to cloud, or further continued use of that. So fundamentally, I mean, again, cloud itself, I think we can all agree, is not necessarily a new concept. It's not necessarily new technology. It's been in existence for some years, and the phrase coined by Eric Schmidt allegedly back in sort of 2006. So it's been around for a while, but I think really where we're seeing that sort of new era of cloud, I guess, is the vast adoption and reliance, I guess, that cloud organizations are placing upon cloud to enable business activities, use of data to happen in a more efficient, cost-effective, and scalable manner. So we look at the different versions of cloud, whether it's infrastructure, platform, or software, and we're also seeing it even today. So the fact we're all virtually connected through Zoom, and the sort of, I suppose, this era now where we're moving towards this work from anywhere concept. We're thinking about technologies very, very differently. And I think that I'm sure most on the call will have experienced the new or enhanced ways of working, but also the enhanced ways of communicating via technologies that support this, which are typically cloud-based solutions, one-to-many multi-tenanted environments that can offer us can offer us some sort of specific activities around that. So I think where we get to with this, we end up in a position where cloud in itself has become a necessary tool, and I suppose this new world of thinking about cloud as a fundamental pillar of enablement of business to operate effectively. So that sort of obviously leads us through, and I think many will be familiar obviously with Zoom that we're on today, the question marks of privacy and security of Zoom. And I think when communication started happening across this as COVID escalated, and we started to see lots of news stories come out about the security of Zoom, that and by no means do I think that is specific to Zoom. I think it's an inherent challenge that every cloud vendor has got, and every user of cloud has got. But I think what it heightened to me was the fact that most individuals, consumers of the solution, are now faced with considerations around privacy and security, and certainly it's even more heightened because of the increased use of this. And when we come to, I guess, thinking about this, we think about what are the trade-offs? How do we think about grappling with security versus privacy versus performance? So in essence, security being how to ensure that the intruders externally, internally, etc., don't unnecessarily or unlawfully or without permission gain access to the underlying assets, the underlying data.
Hi, sorry, I don't want to barge in, but could I please, hello?
Yes, hello.
Hello, hi, the organizer, could you please mute all of us apart from the speaker, because I think we are listening to two different conversations here.
Okay, apologies for this, everybody. I will make sure that happens, but if everybody could go on mute as well. Yeah, apologies for that. That should be fine now, Paul. Thank you for raising that. Paul, please go ahead, but any other problems, please do raise them in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, great. Well, look, just to sort of, I guess, start that, what I was talking about there again, I mean, when we think about security and privacy in the context of cloud, what always springs to mind for certainly the lens that we have into the space is there is always trade-offs. You cannot have a 100% secure environment whilst also having complete performance. And I think a lot of this comes down to what information are you putting onto the cloud? What are you thinking about using the cloud for? And you've got to think about security in tandem with privacy, in tandem with performance. And I think where I get to with that is the sort of thought process around, is it security and privacy as a complete bucket versus performance, and how do you calibrate yourself so when you're actually thinking about usage of the cloud, you are appropriately calibrating security depending on the actual risks that present, and likewise for privacy. So thinking about what are the risks associated with leveraging cloud-based solutions or cloud-based infrastructure, and how do you appropriately manage those risks to enable performance, to enable the usage of data. And I think this sort of leads us, I guess, into the space of what are those risks? What are the different, and let's start off with privacy. What are the privacy risks associated with the use of any form of technology, cloud being one of those? Obviously, we've got competing laws, regulations around the world which talk to this. We're all familiar with GDPR, for example, but when we look across the globe, there's new and emerging laws happening across Africa, across India, across China, across the US. So it is an evolving landscape that has been in existence for a number of years. In Europe, obviously dating back to the 1995 European Data Protection Directive, but obviously it's been evolved further because of GDPR, and we're seeing, I suppose, the domino effect of regulators around the world, across the Middle East, for example, introducing new laws and regulations to manage this. So I think when it comes to me, when it comes to privacy risks, I tried to and I've distilled this down into this fractal triangle to illustrate to some extent where we can look at the different issues that present itself to manage those privacy risks or security risks. And I think obviously there's different ways that people will slice and dice those risks and how you manage privacy and security in the cloud or in any environment. But I think fundamentally, the same issues typically present themselves, but is how you apply those rules or how you apply those requirements or how you introduce those controls that I think is the essential aspect when it comes to consideration of a safe and secure manner to use a cloud whilst also addressing the privacy risks. And we'll come on to the security risks in a few moments. So I think when we're thinking about, say, the legal risks, for example, contractual risks present itself, or contractual requirements to manage legal risks are always going to be there when, especially when engaging third parties. So, you know, obviously in the cloud space, we know that most cloud service providers will have a one-to-many cloud services agreement, and that typically is drafted in a way to ensure that, like the solution itself being a one-to-many solution, the contract itself is one-to-many. So you know that is very difficult to amend those terms because it's been structured in that way so that all users are in the same basis. But obviously there are different legal requirements that need to go into the contract itself. We think about impact assessments, and not least from the recent European decision to render the US Privacy Shield invalid following Schrems 2. Historically, over the past couple of years, we've become familiar with the concept of data protection impact assessments, but now this concept of data transfer impact assessments is also real and present as a result of the concerns around where data is going to. And obviously lawfulness of data, how do you ensure that what you're using the data for in the environment meets the relevant requirements as it relates to the use of personal data. So I think as we sort of move through, obviously there's technical considerations as well, security, data security, physical security, access requirements, and also thinking as well about how can you take some of these requirements and also make it a business benefit, or certainly use privacy enhancing technology to enable the secure and safe and compliant usage of data when certainly leveraging the power of the cloud can present. And then finally, we'll touch briefly on governance, because I think answering the whole thing are how do you ensure that policy procedures are introduced internally, because it's not just simply an external piece of pushing the responsibilities onto a cloud service provider. It's thinking about the whole holistic, where's data is going to and from. And I think there was a question in the chat. No, I think that's fine. I think we're okay with the sound, Sue. Does everyone hear me okay?
Everything is fine, Paul. You're doing great.
Good. Excellent. Perfect. Technology is working well today. So I think when it comes to governance, we think about policies, procedures, we think about the roles and responsibilities, and really trust and verification. So audit and assurance. How do you ensure that what you are putting in a contract, for example, is being appropriately addressed? How do you ensure that the lawful requirements that are imposed upon you in any case of using the information are being appropriately managed and addressed? And we'll touch briefly on that towards the end, but really where I want to focus on now is, who owns the risk? Who's accountable for that risk? And why does then this balance between security, privacy, and performance become even more important when it comes to leveraging third-party solutions or cloud solutions? I think obviously we can agree that risk ownership, certainly when it comes to data, will always reside with the, certainly in a personal data context, the controller of that data. That risk is still the same if it's non-personal data. So whoever is effectively the owner of that data runs that risk. But when you transfer that out, when you delegate the responsibility out to a third party, is how do you ensure that the risk itself is being appropriately delegated? How do you manage that risk and ensure that it can be done in a controlled manner and a secure manner? And obviously we talked about the legal aspects to that, and there's more complexity, I think, as you dive into the legal considerations around the contract, the impact assessment, and lawfulness, and we can kind of see that on things that you would always want to see in a contract when it comes to managing the privacy risk. And I think those sort of things are data protection obligations. And typically most cloud service providers, and certainly when you look across the standard terms for Azure or Amazon Web Service or Google Cloud and other providers out there, by design, they incorporate these obligations that are set forth by the GDPR, for example. So Article 28, data protection obligations, data processor obligations, they're incorporated. Security of processing, contractually, they're typically incorporated. But obviously, what security means for organizations may depend upon, obviously, the asset that you talk about. What is the sensitivity of that data? And obviously, the international transfers is a hot topic at the moment. So I know that within the conference today, there is a discussion around, obviously, the Schrems II decision and what that means for international transfers, and in particularly in the context of transfers happening from within the European Economic Area to the US. And obviously, we're seeing further guidance come out from the European regulators imminently. But that means that as you sort of move towards the bottom part of the triangle on the slide, impact assessments become even more important when considering the legal risks. So have you carried out your data protection impact assessment on the data that's going to go out there when it's personal data? Have you now considered a transfer impact assessment post Schrems II? What is the jurisdiction where the data will reside, or jurisdictions? And then finally, would you need to consider a legitimate interest assessment as well? Is the lawful basis upon which you're using data, is it legitimate interest, and do you need to consider if that's appropriately been assessed? And then finally, the sort of bottom right of the triangle, we think about lawfulness as a whole. So, have you managed the conditions of processing? What are the rights to those individuals? And have you ensured fair notice to individuals? So all of these things are not new. And I think what I'm trying to represent by the triangle and represent by describing it in this way is that I think that the same rules apply. It's just simply how to allocate the responsibility because of a third party typically helping and supporting with that. And equally, in often the case, I think, when it comes to things like security, part of the benefit, the power of cloud is that often you can increase your security capabilities and privacy capabilities because of the tooling that is available when migrating across. So there's a significant privacy benefit by going, but obviously it comes with risk and ensuring that you are aware of what the legal requirements might be and how to manage that. So I guess just to move on a little bit further, and I want to talk just briefly now about security. And this was sort of the technical aspect that I sort of mentioned before. And when we come to security, there's obviously different ways to consider that. I think part of that is thinking about the different elements of security. And in the context of cloud or an on-premise solution, you've obviously got the different layers of security, the external layers and the internal layers. And I think when it comes to thinking about how to manage the actual assets that you have fundamentally, again, it depends upon obviously what cloud service you're procuring. Perhaps you're procuring a platform service or a software as a service. So some of this may be built into the package that you're obtaining. So actually understanding what elements of that will be obviously very important, depending on sophistication of organizations, teams. It may be that a lot of the aspects of this you're able to manage in-house. Other aspects you'll benefit from the power that some of the cloud service providers can actually offer to address these sorts of things. But sort of going down, the different layers of security, perimeter, network, endpoint security, application security, and then finally data security. The way that we think about this often, certainly from a Protegrity perspective and a Cormian perspective, is thinking about actually what is the actual asset you are worried about? How do you ensure data centricity when it comes to security? Because you can have the outer perimeter secure, but how do you manage what happens is someone gets through the hard perimeter? How do you ensure you're managing the insider risks? And one way of thinking about this is perhaps more data-centric approach to security, securing data, certainly sensitive data, by protecting the data itself. So protecting the entire data flow at rest, in transit, and in use, applying security as close to the data as possible, delivering centralized policy enforcement across the enterprise to manage that. And I think where we sort of lead ourselves to then is an approach, and it'd be really great to as we conclude this part of the presentation, to understand issues, views that those on the call might have around this area. But the way that we would typically look at it from a methodology perspective, when trying to manage all that myriad of different requirements, different rules, different obligations, is to think about really fundamentally, what data do you have? The discovery of data. Do you know what data you've got within the organization? Is it personal data? Is it other data? Is it confidential data? Once you know what you've got, you can classify the data. You can come up with or apply your existing internal data classification policies and procedures around that data, but fundamentally understanding what classifications you need to apply and what controls then would be applicable to that category of data. Governance, thinking about the internal policies, the external contracts to ensure that the relevant classification of data is appropriately managed. Protection, ensuring that obviously the data itself then is protected in accordance with the classification of data. Enforcement of that, and finally monitoring of that. And I think this sort of perhaps way of looking at it is certainly how a lot of organizations do look at it already. It's certainly the way we try to ensure that the complexity of the legal, the technical, the governance aspects are managed effectively. And then we move into a space where a lot of these sorts of issues are addressed. I'm going to pause there, and I can see that a couple of questions are coming through on the chat. But really, those concepts, I hope that was of use for on the call today. I know we're coming close to the end of the allocated time for me today. But perhaps, Sue, if we can just pause there and open up for questions. I know there is already one in the chat about how about user-centric security.
Yeah, do you want to take that one, Paul, to kick us off, perhaps?
Sure. I think that's from Ralph. So Ralph, thanks for the question. I think it's a very interesting point. I think user centricity as well as data centricity. I guess it comes down to what risks you were looking at, but I think it's a really important aspect as well as focusing on the data to look at the user centricity, I guess, as well. My view on that is that absolutely is an important aspect when thinking about access to data, roles, profiles, for example, and ensuring that you are applying access to data as it relates to different profiles of users. If I sort of understand what you're talking about there, Ralph, in terms of user centricity of security, I assume by that your sort of question there relates specifically around those sorts of certainly access management and profiles of users. Is that what you're talking about, or is that your question?
Ralph, please feel free to come off mute if you'd like to add anything else from your question. Perhaps that was it, Paul. Perhaps you've answered it. You've nailed it.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Ralph, go ahead.
Okay. So my impression about this thing is that you're trying to get away from the machine-centric security that we have been doing for decades. and that probably data is better starting point than machines. So this is where. But if you look at bigger pictures, what's driving businesses is their business continuity and their workflows within. And in this concept, data is just one part in the image, and users is the others. But there are many different aspects, and users popped up in my mind first. But if you look at this bigger picture thingy, then data is probably not the right starting point. It's probably better than the machine than the starting point with protecting machines. But there may be other points of view. So that's basically it.
No,
it's
I think
definitely complex, right, Paul? There's definitely lots of different elements that organizations need to think about. I suppose user-centric as well as consumers or users, it's your employees as well in terms of endpoints as well, right?
I completely agree. And I think you know the data centricity view that we were taking there was more of the lens. I think to what Ralph you were talking about there about machines, and generally it's to ensure that we can move away from a point of being fixed to one technology. It's ensuring being technology neutral or agnostic, so it makes things more fluid, so you can actually migrate from an on-premise solution to a cloud solution, because actually you're tracking and securing the data itself rather than the environment around that data. And that's part of the the benefit, I guess, when thinking about data centricity or data-centric security, that you focus on the data rather than the environment, and that makes migration easier, smoother. But absolutely, I think to your point, Sue, I think there are different competing elements at play. I think user security is always going to be a relevant factor, particularly that insider threats, ensuring that you're managing that risk appropriately. But this is what we're talking about here, really, I guess, is that the ability to leverage data and thinking about the performance angle of things without necessarily inhibiting what technology you're looking to leverage that on.
Absolutely. Thanks, Ralph, for your question. Apologies, we're running very quickly out of time, and thank you for putting your camera as well. Great to see you. Hi. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, Paul, so I'm going to be a horrible chair and perhaps group some of these together just so that we can make sure we answer. So Tim Wagner, do you consider transparency a valid pillar of security, showing the affected people every access manipulation of their data? And then we had a question from Nasmus about how do human factors such as potential risks with data leaks with employees at home during COVID lockdown, are they taken into consideration when thinking about data security? I think we kind of touched on that just then around user-centric and protecting the endpoints as well, but perhaps want to just touch on that. And it's the shift from a parameter centric security to a data centric security as a move towards zero trust. I suppose that's a statement, but I think what you're saying is you would agree on that. So just wondered whether you could, in a couple of minutes, just reflect on those, and then we'll have to bring the session to an end. But Paul, perhaps just, of course. Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. And thanks everyone for the engaging questions. It's very interesting. I think that touching on the first couple of points there about transparency as a valid pillar of security, so showing the effect of people every access manipulation of the data. Yeah, I mean, I guess this is part of that. Transparency is I think such an important point, not least for legal reasons, but I think to the point you're talking about there about it goes into trust as well, trust and confidence about how do you ensure that if data is accessible, certainly on the cloud service provider side, about it as the consumer, as the actual owner, the responsible party. So when you share that risk, you've got visibility of what's actually happening with that data. So I think transparency is indeed a valid pillar. I think it's an essential pillar to maintain appropriate allocation of responsibilities. But ultimately, when it comes to governance, how can you deal with that trust and verify? So, whilst you might trust, you need to obviously verify, audit, and assurance checks about what's happening. So I think that's an excellent question. And I'm conscious sometimes I'll be brief on the final couple of points. But I think human factors we've already touched on, and I think in terms of risks of data leakage at home, I think to me a lot of those sorts of human factor risks and issues clearly have always been there. I think it's heightened when it comes to home working, other physical and digital access to data, so hard copies, soft copies, that sort of thing. But just generally, I think it's a more of a real and present issue for companies that have had to grapple with that. And I think the sort of data centricity view on security can help with that. But I think it was Thorsten's comment, I think is a very good one. I agree with that. That it is moving towards that zero trust. So I think overall, I think that hopefully that answers those questions.
I think so, Paul. You've done brilliantly. Thank you
Great.
so much. And
Pleasure.
I think on behalf of everybody, thank you so much for that really insightful and in-depth presentation, and particularly given the technical gremlins. So well done. I know it's hard when things like that happen, so you were absolute pro. So thank you, Paul McCormack, so much. That was fascinating and really brilliant to have you with us. And I'm sure if we were in a room, you would get a thunderous round of applause. So thank you, Paul, so much. Brilliant. There you go. Brilliant to have you with us. Thank you, Paul. And I hope you can stick around for our next speaker, but a pleasure to have you with us. So thank you so much for that brilliant presentation. Right, we now move on to our next speaker, which is brilliant to have with us as well, as Paul just sorts out his screen. So next we're going to be talking about technology as a binding element of data security and data protection with Dr. Waldemar Grudzien, expert director for Core SE, and I think Dr. Grudzien is with us. I think if you could just come off mute. Are you with us?
Hi, I'm here.
Brilliant. Hi, lovely to meet you. Thank you so much for being with us. Really looking forward to your presentation. And thank you for being with us at the deep dive stage today at the Bitkom Privacy Conference. For those, just before we start, Dr. Grudzien, I'll just give a bit of housekeeping to everybody, because some people may have just only joined us. So welcome if you have. It's great to have you with us. If you could just make sure that you're all on mute so we can just minimize any background noise. Any other sound gremlins or anything, please drop me a message on the chat function and we'll soon sort that out. And also, if you have a question for this next session, please share that or any comments in the chat, and I can check the box and invite you to ask the questions, and we should have some time at the end of the presentation. But please remember your name will be displayed when you ask a question or a comment in the chat function, and this meeting is being recorded and will be available on the Bitkom YouTube channel afterwards. So without further ado, if you're ready, Dr. Grudzien, I'm going to hand over to you to take us through your presentation on technology as a binding element of data security and data privacy.
Thank you, Sue. I will try to share my screen now.
Okay, and your sound is a little low, so I don't know if you're able.
Now?
That's better now. Thank you.
Okay, so I have to keep the mic at my face, and wait a moment. Now it should be the best mode you have now. Okay.
Perfect. Over to you.
Okay, you see it. Okay, let us come to my first slide. Maybe a first small introduction. I'm working with Core for the last 4.5 years. Core is an IT think tank, as you can see, and we concentrate for technology transformation with a regional focus on the gas region and the Gulf region, so a little bit separated from each other. We develop strategies, applications, and systems and implement them. On request, we can also operate these IT systems on premise, but maybe it's better to do it now on clouds, as we have heard some minutes ago. For myself, I have a doctorate in electrical engineering and a master of business administration. My focus now is on data protection and information security and the regulation of these two areas. I'm working as an operational ISO, that means an information security officer, and as a DPO, that means a data protection officer. At some customers at a time, they vary from, let me say, 20 staff members up to 3,000 staff members. And I develop both management systems, that means an ISMS and an PIMS, and if desired, bring the customers even through an ISO audit, for example, a 27001 audit. Before Core, I worked for private banks, and there on all aspects of online banking and card payment schemes, above all on the security of these two topics. And below right on this slide, you can see my last 3 projects at Core. So that was my small introduction. On the next slide, you see that technology is the simultaneous key to enabling digitization, ensuring privacy, and protecting against cybersecurity threats. As we are with Bitkom today, according to a Bitkom survey from the last year, the average damage per cybersecurity incident was 4.3 million euros, 4.3 million euros on average. And if personal data such as credit card data is damaged in such incidents, the damage can increase further as a result of a fine imposed by the Data Protection Supervisory Authority and claims for damages by the data subject, by the people concerned. As you can see, technology is the key to protecting information and personal data and to shaping the path towards the unavoidable digitization. We cannot avoid it, we should go for it. So that means technology is a combination of the 3 aspects: data protection, cybersecurity, and digitization itself in the magic circle. The next slide. Challenges in implementing data protection requirements are often based on misperceptions. The first one, firstly, there is nothing wrong with the world of law. It's a very exciting area, but it is also data protection and the GDPR. It's seen too much through the lens of paragraphs from my point of view. The world is going online. The world is becoming more digital. Software is eating the world. Data is on the net. Technology has taken over, so data protection must also be seen from a technical perspective. In the second row, data protection can already be automated in many applications scenarios by using modern IT and modern IT infrastructures. Think of a simple office suite. Everything there is processed and can be automatically prepared for data protection purposes. In this respect, not everything in data protection has to be customized again and again from the scratch. Think about policies and processes which can be standardized and even automated with the help of technology. And thirdly, last but not least, data protection is not only a cost factor, but on the contrary, a competitive factor, as you will see in the following. 2 pages ago, I explained that the modern IT infrastructure provides better protection against cybersecurity incidents and thus leads to a higher level of data protection. You know that the GDPR is the first data protection law in the world to include the words protection through the use of technology and even the word encryption in the legal text. And data protection laws have been around for 50 years. You may know that the first data protection law was launched in 1970 in Hesse, in the Bundesland Hesse. So coming back to the GDPR, 24 of the 99 articles for the GDPR directly or indirectly describe the use of technology. And central to this is Article 32, which is called Security of Processing, which describes all technical and organizational measures, the so-called TOM, that are required for technical and organizational data protection and can be mapped by an information security management system, an ISMS. And an ISMS is the best basis for a privacy information management system, a PIMS. So in the following, I will show you how technology help to fulfill the TOM using the three examples: access control, the A here, cryptography, and pseudonymization. We will start with access control. Access control is to infrastructures, to systems, and to applications is probably the most powerful TOM in information security and therefore also in data protection. This TOM consists of many tools, which I categorized here on the slide into baseline and into additional tools. The basis is an identity directory, an ID, for example, an AD in the case of Microsoft Azure Directory, Active Directory, sorry. Microsoft Azure Active Directory is very famous, on which, for example, an SSO and single sign-on and network security groups can be built. The basis tools can all be implemented on-premise, of course, and in the cloud. However, clouds offer additional tools that cannot be built on-premise. Examples are conditional access, cloud-specific policies, security policies, time-based access control, various dashboards that even give advice on how to increase the level of data security and privacy, and cloud-exclusive risk tools. Access control in one sentence means on-premise you can do a lot, but in the cloud you can do more and easier and therefore more secure. The next slide deals with cryptography. Cryptography is a well-known topic. Everybody is talking about cryptography, and that's right. But it's nothing new since Bruce Schneier, one of the famous cryptographers, stands for the S in the RSA algorithm, introduced asymmetric cryptography in the 1970s of the last century. The ground was prepared by Bruce Schneier for the use of cryptography on the internet. Until then, the symmetric key had to be distributed laboriously, which is not a method for large distributed networks like the internet. Strictly speaking, cryptography consists only of four methods for the whole internet. And the four methods are the digital signature, the message authentication codes, a MAC, known as a MAC, the symmetric and the asymmetric encryption. That's all. Hashing works with and without a key. Only the key variant could be named cryptography. And pseudonymization is not part of cryptography, but it's getting more and more important for the new requirements in data protection, as we will see later. A short summary to cryptography. Cryptography is well researched and available at standard tools like libraries, like measures, and in integrated development environments, IDEs. Cryptography has been proven to be applicable. The only thing that is important for data protection with cryptography is the protection of the confidentiality. These are the red rectangles here. However, cryptography cannot solve a central problem in data protection. End-to-end encryption and point-to-point encryption, P2P, help against compromised systems and attackers in your own network during data transfer. So data transfer is well protected by encryption. Memory encryption helps against the theft of a memory, such as a hard disk, for example. Bring your own key, BYO key, does not help against the cloud provider if the data is in the cloud. It's not only to be stored, but also processed. So if your aim is to process your data, which should normally be the case, even bring your own key does not help against your cloud provider. But let me give you a word on this. Please consider the following. If you go into a cloud, you hand over your IT completely, 100% into the cloud provider. That is your well-justified goal. If you let the cleaning woman or the craftsman into your flat, you hand over the cleaning and repair, and above all your flat to the cleaning woman and to the craftsman. If you would not trust both of them, you would not let them in. You would not give your IT to a provider you did not trust. That's the case. So why the often heard concerns about the cloud? Back to encryption. This helps at rest and at transport. Encryption helps at rest and at transport, but not at processing, because there is no continuous so-called homomorphic cryptography yet. At present, the data must be available unencrypted for processing. This means that cryptography cannot intervene here at all. Cryptography, encryption, has no chance to protect your data because you want to calculate with your data. However, data at processing can be protected with the term pseudonymization. So we'll go on to the pseudonymization. With pseudonymization, there's three functions which you see here in the legend of the slide. The three functions of pseudonymization, holding the assignment rule, the H, and processing the P, the C for calculating, can be divided between 1, 2, or even 3 controllers. In my opinion, this division of these three functions will shape completely new business models in the nearest future. If you separate the assignment rule, that is the link between the personal data and the person itself, for example, customer ID, and in the slide, it is the function H as mentioned. Processing outside the European Economic Area, the EEA, becomes possible and the privacy shield becomes obsolete. It is even possible to keep the assignment rule with the data, for example, in a hardware security model in HSM. This keeps the latency small, which is in some cases, in some scenario, should not be too long. This is because the principle from card payment schemes, I told you that I worked for the banks for a long time, can be transferred here. It's called tamper resistant. It's not new, it's about 15 years on the market. And that means if a bank card chip, the chips on your MasterCards, Visas, and so on, if a bank card chip notices that it is being attacked, it immediately deletes the stored PIN. That's all about this. Applied to our purpose, this means if an HSM notices that it is being attacked, it deletes the allocation rule, and the data is anonymized and thus unusable for the attacker. So pseudonymous processing in EEA or in an HSM, which is located outside the EEA, makes the privacy shield obsolete with the help of the separation of the three functions of the pseudonymization. All TOMs can be implemented on a self-managed and on-premise basis. As you saw with the example of the TOM access control a few slides ago, they are firstly measures that only a cloud can offer, and secondly, these measures in a cloud are already there. You don't have to implement them yourself with a lot of effort. Thus, a well-managed cloud offers, besides the architectural advantages of availability, flexibility, and scalability, a much higher level of security than is possible on-premise. And why is this so? Why it's the case? Cloud providers employ many dedicated resources for security and data protection improvement. Coming back to Microsoft Azure as an example. Microsoft Azure, within Microsoft Azure, 3,500 security experts work on this cloud, and Microsoft spends $1 billion a year on security and data protection alone. How do you intend to compete with Azure? But that is not your job either. You have your core business, and the cloud can better support you to be successful in your core business. And cloud or on-premise is not your core business. On the right, you see the hyperscalers and a European concept. As explained, cryptography and function-separated pseudonymization offer all methods for new and secure data processing also outside Europe. Legislators and supervisors are enforcing stricter data protection regulations in Europe and in Germany and increased monitoring of data protection violations. In addition, consumer awareness of their data protection is increasing. If only to minimize financial losses from fines and loss of reputation due to data protection violations, industry must ensure that its data protection compliance is maintained. Apart from this, there are good examples of how to gain a competitive advantage by emphasizing data protection. As we have heard, I would say, an hour ago from Mr. Kelber, the Corona Warn app only became a success when data protection was guaranteed and users gained confidence that they would remain anonymous. As of the 22nd of September, the app had downloaded over 18 million. I think, do I have to say anything about Apple? I think it's not needable here. So as you can see in the picture on the right, it is a great advantage to see data protection as an integral part and to develop it together with the IT strategy and business strategy and to run into a single comprehensive overall strategy for a company. And the market shows that privacy by strategy can lead to success. So you know the privacy by design and privacy by default from Article 25 of the GDPR. Let us come back, or let us further develop it to privacy by strategy. Then I think that we will gain now then more success with privacy. Core has already published a white paper. It happened in June this year on the subject of data protection. And you can find the German and an English version of this white paper at the link provided. Okay, thank you very much for the listening, and now we can maybe open the discussion.
Absolutely. Thank you, Waldemar, for a brilliant presentation and really bringing to life the role of technology as an enabler of greater data protection, data security, and particularly those technologies that we hear a lot about, but actually looking at what they can really mean in action. And great to see you. Hi, thank you so much.
Can you see me?
Yeah, yes, I can. I was about to say loud and clear, but I can see you clearly. So hello.
Okay.
And please remind everybody, if you have a question for our speaker, please pop it in the chat function. I don't think I've seen any questions so far, so I'm going to take moderator's privilege, if I may, and just ask a question in terms of given that technology is an enabler, as you outlined, and it can be a really powerful tool. What are the kind of questions you are seeing organizations asking? You know, you talked about concerns still about the cloud, maybe other technologies. What are the kind of common challenging questions that people raise around, well, what can technology actually do to help increase our data protection, data privacy, security? What's on businesses' minds right now, perhaps?
Yeah, at the time in Germany, I'm an ISO and a DPO at some customers in Germany and in Switzerland. The first question is, how can I come along with the basis requirements of the GDPR? The basis is records of directory, Verfahrensverzeichnis, or the deletion. How can I delete my data, my personal data, after the, say, how to say it, not retired, but how can I delete the process, deleting processes? How can I delete in a cloud in my applications? And then, these are I would say, the basic questions. And I do not hear many obstacles for the using of a cloud. I think that a cloud, above all, at my customers, is, I would say, how to say it, a commodity. Yeah, something like a commodity. So they are not aware, they are not anxious of using a cloud. But the first obstacles to get conformed to the GDPR. These are the higher risks, or not the higher first obstacles to get in the flowing, to get on the move with data protection.
Yep, to get going and get on what we sometimes call the journey of cloud, and
to start the journey.
To start the journey, and
with the
actually,
GDPR.
absolutely, and I actually feel that a lot more people have started that journey since we have all started working in this new different ways. So this is a great conversation to have. Marco Schultz had a question. Marco wanted to raise around ISO 2771. Marco, the floor is yours to ask your question to Dr. Grudzien.
Thank you very much, Sue, and hi, Waldemar. Waldemar, you were mentioning ISMS, and now with 2.5 years of GDPR, privacy management systems should be the state-of-the-art way to communicate data privacy concerns into boards, much like the CISO is doing it for information security through management systems. And most cost-effective ways should be to have integrated management system. Hence, there is an ISO standard now out for a while, 27701. Actually, I have a typo in my chat here. Have you seen this populating, and is there any expected acceptance in the market and adoption by now?
Yeah, okay, I know this standard, of course, and I would say there's no understanding that an ISO 27701 is already available on the market. As I said to the first question of Sue, it's still very hard for the companies. It doesn't matter how big or small they are, for the companies to get on the journey to start to be simple, compliant, not conform, compliant to the GDPR with the first steps, with absolutely needable documents like the records of processing, the deletion concept, and the TOM document. Think about the TOM document. And as you know, the difference between the 27001 and 27701, there are only two differences in the integration of the risks. That's the HLS number 6 and 8, and something far in the A18 and A17, which laws you have to incorporate into your risk models and so on. So the differences are, from my point of view, very small. But now I'm repeating myself. Firstly, you have to come into the first big points, and then the transferring of 27001 into 27701, from my point of view, is a very easy step, a very fast and cheap step to transmit it. Or otherwise, if you already live an ISMS, it's not rocket science to go into the PIMS anymore.
Very much agreeing. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Marco, for your question. Well, I'm afraid I don't see any more questions, and we have actually, this time goes so quickly, we have actually run out of time, unfortunately. So
Sorry, Sue.
No, please do not apologize, Dr. Waldemar Grudzien. That was a fascinating presentation, and thank you so much for being with us today and for walking us through really bringing to life how these technologies can really be a helper and a really key asset and tool to help organizations get data privacy and data security right and align what they need to do with the GDPR. So thank you so much for being with us. We really do appreciate it. And as always, I'm sure there would be also a huge round of applause for you if we were in a normal room, but we send it virtually. So many thanks. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Stop my sharing. Bye.
Brilliant. Thank you. Another wonderful presentation, everybody. And I'm sure you would agree it's fascinating, but we have more to come. So please stay with us. And I'm loving the virtual clapping. So well done, guys. Thank you so much. So we have two more great presentations for you in the deep dive stage today. Next, we're going to hear from Yuri Shususko, and I hope I've said that right, Yuri. Apologies if I'm not. Software engineer at Google, talking about differential privacy. And then after Yuri, we have Kurt Kammerer from Data Vaccinator, who will be joining us as well. So two more great presentations ahead. So before we kick off, Yuri, just if people have joined us, again, welcome. Brilliant to have you with us. You've missed two brilliant presentations, but you've got two brilliant ones to go. Just to, if you can make sure, and obviously Yuri, this doesn't apply to you, but if as Yuri's presenting, if everyone could stay on mute, please, that would be awesome. If you have a question or a comment, please pop it in the chat function, or any problems technically, let me know as well, although you'll be glad to hear, Yuri, I think the technical gremlins have left us, so that's awesome. Just be aware that if you're putting something in the chat function, your name will be present, and this meeting is being recorded. And when you come to ask a question, if you'd like to put your camera on, as people have done, like Marco just did and said hello, that's awesome as well. It's great to see everybody. So so I think that's all my housekeeping. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Yuri Shishushko, software engineer from Google and a manager of the anonymization team. So really good link up to what we've just been talking about. Yuri has been actively working on privacy infrastructure for the last 6 years. So a real expert, and is currently developing solutions for rigorous anonymization techniques in general and differential privacy, which I think is, Yuri, what you're going to be talking to us about today. So pleasure to have you with us. Welcome. And I will say the floor is yours. Over to you.
Thanks so much to you for the introduction. Let me quickly present the slides.
Perfect, Yuri. All
right. Yeah, so again, thanks so much for inviting me, and thanks for your interest in differential privacy. And I think I've been giving a talk for Bitkom as well in May about differential privacy, and some of you may have seen some parts of this talk, so apologies for the overlap, but there is also some new content. So yeah, so as a concept, differential privacy was, and sorry, just for the moment, can you see the slides? Because I can't see them on the screen.
Yes, we can see the slides, Yuri. You're doing good.
Excellent. All right. Yeah. So as a concept, differential privacy was introduced quite some time ago. It was 15 years ago, but it took some time to mature and to become practical for the industry to pick this up. And today we'll do a little deep dive into differential privacy and how it is used for a few practical use cases. So before, first of all, let's talk about a broader concept called data anonymization. And here let's look at one practical example. So across Google services, we leverage user data to personalize and improve our products and make them better for everyone. And of course, while doing so, it's very important to make sure that the privacy of individual users that participate in data sets is respected. For example, you might have seen this quite popular feature in Google Maps, where you can check how busy a particular restaurant or point of interest is by looking on this histogram or bar plot that shows you business times. And what is remarkable here that this data is actually based on actual visits, on actual location, which is, as you guess, is very sensitive, and it's very crucial to protect this data with rigorous anonymization techniques. And this is the core idea behind anonymization. It's something that takes sensitive data and makes it less sensitive, makes it private, and protects privacy of individual users. This is, of course, very generic, but this definition has some merits. So specifically, anonymous data reduces privacy and security risks, right? So if we don't store the original data set and only the anonymous copy of this, there is inherently less risks associated with this. And sometimes anonymization can provide comparable statistical insights. And in some cases, it can even be beneficial to the data utility because it removes some of the collection noise, right? So there's always this long tail of distribution where you see some very peculiar outliers, data points, and sometimes we are not even interested in those data points. So in this case, anonymization actually helps achieving better data utility. And there is a lot of variety in different anonymization techniques and tools. Today we'll focus on one of the important and the most famous and recently developed technique called differential privacy. But before that, I think it's important to highlight that anonymization is actually hard. It may look deceivingly simple, right? So things like de-identification that have been tried before, things like k-anonymities where we try to group data by buckets, and achieve privacy that way. So many of those techniques have been proven to be ineffective at protecting user privacy in some use cases. So proper data anonymization is surprisingly very hard. And that's where differential privacy comes into play. So differential privacy is a mathematically rigorous way to define anonymization and or data privacy. So when we say privacy, right, what do we mean by that? When we say this data is private, this is difficult to quantify. And the goal of differential privacy is exactly that, to attach some mathematical notion, some number to the privacy. So that we are able to exactly quantify how private this data set is. And differential privacy has a lot of theory and math behind this. But again, the main goal, the main concept is to be able to have a mathematical, tangible definition of privacy. Let's look at one practical example to illustrate what differential privacy is. So coming back to our previous example from Maps, where we build a bar plot of business, of restaurants or places of interest. And what is important to ensure that when we look on the results on the histograms, we should be able to reveal information about individual users here. And you see on the left, you see two data sets with only one difference, right? There is one person that was added or removed from the data set. And the key property of differential privacy is that it is impossible with some high probability to infer the presence of a particular person in data set by just looking at the results. So to give a bit more fun practical example, let's imagine that you're attending a 2-day conference and the moderator shares some insights about the audience, right? And here we see two data sets, blue and orange, blue from the day 1 and orange from the day 2. And you can immediately see that the orange data set has an extra person, right? So it's very clear that one person was added, and furthermore, it's clear that this person is actually French. So coming back to our definition of differential privacy, this will not be differentially private. How do we go about that? How do we publish the data without compromising the privacy of this particular individual? So we will add a little bit of noise to the data set, right? So, and by noise, I mean we will make the data less accurate. You see this jump in bars, which basically means that we added some normal distributed noise. And what is remarkable here that we can see some insights, right? We can see that Germany has less participants than Switzerland, France has least amount of participants, UK has the largest amount of participants. So these are interesting statistical insights. And the fact that we added noise doesn't prevent us from having those insights. The data is still useful, but at the same time, it is more private because we cannot see the extra contribution of one individual. And that's differential privacy in a nutshell. We can add more noise, right? And the more noise we add, the more privacy we have, obviously, mathematically, but the utility of the data degrades. So as you see here, sometimes it's we added more noise and it's not as clear as before that, let's say, I don't know, Germany has less participants than Switzerland because the bars are jumping. So, and this is an inherent trade-off of differential privacy, or even broader, this is a trade-off of privacy. The more accurate data we publish, the more data in general we publish, the less private is the outcome. And this trade-off is very visible in differential privacy definition. All right, so that's all great, and differential privacy is not very complex conceptually. We just add some noise to the data. And of course, this noise has to be carefully calibrated to protect the privacy of the data. For example, if you have a data set of, let's say, income of people, and there are outliers, that is like a CEO of a big company with big income. So to protect the privacy of these outliers, you need to add noise which is proportional to the maximum contribution of the individual users. So there are some subtleties, but conceptually it's relatively simple. And also, this provides very nice formal mathematical guarantees of what is privacy and how privacy can be quantified. But of course, there is always, the devil is in details, and differential privacy is quite difficult in practice. This is quite tricky to implement, and the noise, for example, even if we're talking about the noise, the type of noise that is added have to be cryptographically secure and have to be secure against exposing information using, for example, such subtle details as floating point implementation details. So those are the details that are outside of scope of this deep dive, but the key message is that those details are very tricky to implement and even to notice that they exist. In this regard, differential privacy is somehow similar to cryptography. And there is like a slogan that says, please don't roll on your cryptography, right? It's not going to work. Please trust the experts. And this is, to a large extent, is true for differential privacy. All right. So as I mentioned before, even though differential privacy was invented 15 years ago, it is still a relatively young and cutting-edge technique, but it is getting more and more momentum. And what is remarkable that for the first time in history, the US Census Bureau will be using differential privacy to protect the published results in 2020. And this is really exciting, and this was a big breakthrough for the field of differential privacy. So we also use it at Google, and in fact, we consider differential privacy to be the golden standard of anonymization that we use to protect user data in a number of ways. One example that we have already seen before is Popular Times in Maps. And I'm using this example again because it's very easy to explain what's going on here. There is user data, which is based on actual location history, and there is this bar plot, which should be carefully calibrated not to expose any information about individuals. And this is using differential privacy behind the scenes. Another high-profile example of differential privacy that was published recently is a COVID-19 community mobility reports. So the key idea of this data set is publication of changes in mobility patterns related to lockdown. For example, we can ask questions like, do people go to work more? Do people visit places like parks, groceries, or pharmacies more or less because of the lockdown? And this data set basically allows to provide useful insights into how effective social distance measures are without leaking private information, which is very important. And again, behind the scenes, this data set is using something quite sensitive. This is using actual location history collected from mobile phones. And in this regard, it is of crucial importance to protect the privacy of individuals when we publish such aggregate insights. And it may seem, aggregate enough, like this type of data sets, and still it is important to use rigorous mathematical analysis and technique to protect this. And differential privacy allows to make this reasoning possible. Right, so how exactly are we using differential privacy in this particular case in COVID mobility reports? So we count the number of people in a geographic area, let's say Bayern in Germany or Munich or California or United States. We have different levels of granularity there. And let's say we counted there are 8,238 people present in particular area at a particular point of time. And then we add noise. And in this case, noise is a Laplace noise. Well, the shape of noise is Laplace, which is typically differential privacy. In this case, the randomly generated noise is 79. And we get a differentially private count by summing this. And in this case, instead of 8,238, we publish something slightly different. And what is remarkable that it doesn't, for the purpose of this statistics, it doesn't really matter that the number is slightly different. But what does matter that this slight additional noise allows to protect privacy of individual contributors here. How can you use it in particular? So as I mentioned before, differential privacy is relatively easy to understand conceptually. It's about adding carefully chosen amount of noise. But there are a lot of implementation subtleties like in cryptography. So starting from 2019 and continuing in 2020, we published a set of differentially private libraries, and we open sourced them. They're available on GitHub. They're available in 3 languages, C++, Java, and Go. and they provide you APIs which can take all the complexity of differential privacy, or at least most of the complexity. There are still some subtleties that remain on the surface, but most of the complexities are taken care by the libraries, which enables you to leverage the expert knowledge and not dive too deep, and eventually come up with a safer implementation of differential privacy. Another remarkable example is machine learning, right? So machine learning is usually a special beast. It's very complex. It's much more complex than, let's say, bar plots. Bar plots is simple statistics, whereas machine learning is often this kind of black box that does something, right? And there are sophisticated algorithms behind machine learning. But what is of highlight for this slide is that we published a system called Tensorflow Privacy that allows to train machine learning models in a differentially private way. So machine learning is as any statistical technique, is something that takes sensitive data as an input and produces outputs. And it's important to ensure that there is no leakage of privacy here. And the protocol that we developed, called Differential Privacy Stochastic Gradient Descent, implemented in TensorFlow Privacy, this protocol is allows you to train a model in differentially private way. The final slide actually is a quick announcement that tomorrow, unfortunately, it's very short notice, I realize, but tomorrow we host a code lab for one of the open source frameworks that I announced before. And during this code lab, my colleague Miraj will explain how to apply this framework for a few practical use cases. How to develop your own pipeline that takes sensitive data, processes it using different typical statistical algorithms, and generates differentially private results. Yeah, unfortunately it's tomorrow, but still, if you have a chance, I think it's really helpful. There is a website, there is a link here, but we can also follow up in the chat if you're interested to join. With that, thanks everyone for your attention, and I'm really looking forward to any questions.
Brilliant, Yuri. Thank you so much. A really interesting approach, and it's fascinating the work that you're doing. So thank you so much for walking us through that. So a reminder to all of you, if you have a question for Yuri, please pop it in the chat function, and then I can either raise it with Yuri directly or call on you also to put it to our speaker yourself. If you would like to do that, please turn your camera on. It's great to see everybody, and I'm sure that would help with the conversation. But Yuri, we do have one already, which I think is in response to one of the examples you gave a bit earlier, around, do you think it's acceptable to manipulate statistics by adding noise? And how would accurate statistics in the example affect a person's privacy? So I think this would have been a bit further back in your presentation. So do you want to, can you kind of maybe talk around that, and about how the adding noise may, I suppose, manipulate statistics, and how that affects, perhaps could have unintended consequences, I suppose, on people's privacy as well, perhaps? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that question. And that's a very fair question. Adding noise affects utility in the end. So it does affect utility. And in some cases, it may be unacceptable, right? So when we publish a differentially private result, it is of crucial importance to clearly understand how much noise is added and how it affects utility. So in some cases, the noise may be large enough not to make the statistics acceptable. And in this case, a publication of actual protocol of the data, right? So we publish differential privacy with these parameters, and we added this amount of noise. So this allows the consumers of the statistics to judge whether it's whether this is acceptable or not. But this is a perfectly valid question, right? And just like one comment, it is often the utility degradation, or like the actual amount of noise that we add to protect user privacy, is often negligible in comparison to the privacy we get. It is still a factor, right? We still need to consider this, but it's often on practice very negligible. And second question, how would accurate statistics in the example affect the person's privacy? Right. So in the example we had before about the conference, right? When we publish 2 data sets, before and after, like day 1 and day 2, we do see that there's an extra person and that person is French. Of course, that doesn't automatically mean that we know the name of this person or something private about this person, but this does leak information. And if somebody has some auxiliary information, for example, we know that there is potentially a person joining the conference, but we don't know yes or no, right? And this publication allows you to make this judgment. In itself, it may not violate privacy, but with some auxiliary information, which we never know and can't control, this can violate privacy.
Thank you. We had a question touch on this, and then before I perhaps ask Ralph if he'd like to ask his question directly, how do you remove the noise to read the accurate data? Or once you've added the noise, do you not remove it? Does the noise stay as part of that data set going forward? Because then I would imagine if you use that data set for other things, that could have an influence on it as in other contexts or other uses, right? So do you remove the noise, can you, or do you leave it in there?
The noise is actually left there. So the data set is intentionally made a bit less accurate, right? It is a bit less accurate, and similar to the question from Ed before, similar to my answer there, we have to be clear about that we do add noise, but the noise is often negligible, and the noise is not removed later. So the noise is inherent part of this data set. Fascinating.
Okay, Ralph, did you want to ask your question, or do you want me to raise it? I'm quite happy. I'm quite happy to raise it then. So Ralph asks, can you apply differential privacy to geographical tracking data?
Tracking is interesting. Maybe I'm not entirely understand the tracking piece in this particular context, so it will be useful to clarify. But in general, differential privacy can be applied to geodata, right? For example, location history, as we just have seen on one practical example with mobility reports. So whenever there is a possibility to aggregate data, so because differential privacy includes not only addition of the noise, but aggregation as a step before. So it's aggregation plus addition of the noise to mask the contributions of individual users. So for tracking specifically, if you need to join multiple traces in particular, right? I don't immediately see, to be honest, I'm not ready to answer this question. I don't immediately see how differential privacy can be applied, right? When you need to, when eventually your output is dependent on contributions of individual users, it is, to my opinion, it is inherently difficult to anonymize this in this case, right? If this is something aggregate, right, in this case, we see that, the trends decreased and people visit Sparks more. This is possible to anonymize and to get insights for using differential privacy. If it is somehow about individual contributors, right? And I'm not sure like if this applies to this particular question, geographical tracking data. I think this is less applicable, or not applicable in some cases.
Thank you, Yuri. I don't think I have any other questions, but we have a bit of time. So while everyone's thinking, if I can use moderator's prerogative and ask a question, if that's all right, Yuri. So we at Tech UK, we are doing a lot of work around the transformative and emerging technologies, particularly data-driven technologies, that can really make a difference to our lives and how we all operate and how we all live in this new world, particularly in this new normal. And you've outlined some of that today, so thank you. But it's also important that we get this right from not just a data privacy, but an ethical and responsible way in terms of the way that these technologies are developed and used. I just wondered whether you might be able to touch on how or to what extent the more not just operational but the ethical issues and the considerations and concerns, because we know these technologies are very exciting to all of us, that's why we're here, but it can raise concerns as well from a not just a legal but an ethical and an impact on people's lives point of view. So I just wondered from your perspective how those issues are addressed or considered as you work through what these technologies can do and how they're developed going forward. Is that something you might be able to just touch on briefly?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it's also a bit similar to the question of Ed about adding noise, right? Is it possible to manipulate statistics, right? And here, like from the ethical angle, I think it's important to understand the effects of the processing on the data, and if there is a possibility to introduce bias to the data, that is something that may be unacceptable. For example, imagine that the U.S. census, if there was bias to particular groups of people because of this manipulation of statistics, right, of adding noise, or because of removing the long tails of distribution, right, if there are some minorities, or there is like a little village somewhere. So it is of crucial importance to understand the effects of differential privacy. And to my knowledge, U.S. Census is a great example of doing an excellent job in this. I think they have published technical reports about this, or will publish. So, and because they use differential privacy, and because it's super important to consider the ethical angle and the angle of potential biases, I think U.S. Census will be an excellent example of how they treat this particular question. But I don't know the technical details, unfortunately, what exactly is being done. But I imagine this is about ensuring there is no bias, and ensuring that it's about making sure that minority populations are also included in the data set and not cut out by differential privacy or by different thresholding mechanisms. But it's a very good question.
Absolutely. Oh, well, thank you for answering it. Absolutely. I think bias is a huge part of the debate and the discussion we're having now. Of course, it has been for a while, but particularly given events of this year, has really risen to the front of how, from a industry point of view, how we get that right. And issues around, of course, transparency and explainability, and how we can challenge some of the outcomes perhaps that these models are making. But I know from my work and our work at Tech UK how important industry are taking this issue and the strides that we're making to make sure that we do get this right, as these technologies play much more role in our lives, not just to find out if a restaurant's busy, but in other ways as well, right? So a lot more to come, but I think it's important that we bring everyone in this conversation, which is why it's so great to have you speaking here today at the Bitcoin Privacy Conference. So thank you. These conversations are important to bring everybody into, and you've really helped us bring us up to speed in some really exciting technological developments. So thank you so much, Yuri. And as I would say to everybody, thunderous applause for Yuri, please. Absolutely amazing presentation. And thank you for being with us today, Yuri. And pleasure to meet you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Steven. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye-bye. Well, I hope Yuri can stick with us, though, for our last presentation of the day. And I'm seeing in the chat, Yuri, absolute thunderous applause for you, and very well deserved. So brilliant. Thank you so much for being with us. So our next speaker, and we are absolutely dead on time, which I'm taking as a huge win today. We have one more speaker today, which is Kurt Camarera from Data Vaccinator. Kurt, I see you. Hello, nice to see you. Pleasure to meet you. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you for having me.
No, it's brilliant. So Kurt, before we kick off and I hand over to you to really bring this deep dive stage to a close today, we just a few housekeeping rules for anybody that's just joined us. So please, if you could stay on mute through Kurt's presentation. If you'd like to ask a question or you have a comment, please pop it in the chat function. And as you see, as we just did with Yuri, I can raise it for you, or I'll just maybe pop you a message and say, would you like to raise it to Kurt yourself? If you would like to, please turn your camera on. It's great to see lots of faces. I'm sure Kurt would appreciate the question direct to him if that's the case. But please be aware that your name will be visible in the chat function, and this meeting is being recorded and will be shared on the YouTube channel later. Forgive me if you stuck with me for all of this morning. You've heard that about 3 times, but for those of you that have just joined us, welcome. Great to have you with us. I think with that, Kurt, if you're ready, I'm going to hand over to Kurt Kammerer, who's the CEO of Data Vaccinator and Regify. Kurt co-founded Data Vaccinator, the first open source company for industrialized pseudonymized data. He also in 2020, apologies, Kurt, in 2007, he co-founded Regify, the enabler of a unique networked multi-provider business for trusted communications and collaboration. And is in his role as CEO, he's established businesses across Europe and the Asian market. So a real expert to help bring this session to a close, Kurt. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. I don't have a title for your presentation, so what I'm going to do is just hand over to you. So Kurt, the floor is yours, and please take it away.
Thank you, Sue. And just let me give you the title. The title is Vaccinating Data Against Abuse. And we, as you explained initially, have been in the security space for quite a while as Regify, and we have always worked in this realm of customers that consider their data to be vulnerable all the time, and they are vulnerable. The data is vulnerable for all the right reasons. So when we looked at this vulnerability issue, you can approach it from the DLP side, the data loss prevention side, where you do everything possible in order to make the data as secure as can be, but you can also look at it from the accident side. It's like in road traffic. You have data traffic, and the more data traffic you have, the more likely accidents are going to happen. And what the industry doesn't have at this point is what the road industry has developed a long time ago, is an airbag. So in case of data accidents, you should have an airbag in the industry, or to put it in other words, you should have a possibility to vaccinate data against abuse. And with datavaccinator.com, we have exactly tried to start this back in 2019, when vaccines have not been as popular as they are today. And so we choose Data Vaccinator as a name for vaccinating data against abuse and vaccinating data against risks that, now you should have the slide again, against risks that you see all over the place. It's data breaches.
Okay, Kurt, sorry, just
yeah.
to pause, we can't see your slides. I don't think, I don't know if Lennart, maybe you can help Kurt. I can't see his slides, so.
Sorry
Kurt,
for that.
No, I think you may need to share your screen with us, Kurt, if that's okay. Don't worry. This is not the worst technological gremlin we've had today. At one point, my Zoom completely went and I disappeared. So don't worry. And we've got plenty of time, so no panic.
Yeah, okay. Better now? No. So let me go next door to people who understand technology better than I do. I come back in a second.
Okay, no problem whatsoever. While Kurt's just sorting out his technical issues, I hope that you're finding the presentations so far really, really interesting. For those beady-eyed of you will notice my Amazon Alexa is now flashing yellow. That is that I am due a delivery. So can we all please keep our fingers and toes crossed that my doorbell doesn't ring, because this is now telling me something is on its way. But hopefully we will get there in a minute. So just to remind you as well, when Kurt's presentation has come to an end, you can ask questions, or please do so during his presentation in the chat. And then of course, after today's session, all of the presentations, including the slides that you've seen, will be available on the Bitkom YouTube channel. So you'll be able to go back and see if you missed anything, or go and watch the presentations again. But it looks like Kurt is finding his presentation. Kurt, we can now see your slides. You might need to go into sharing mode, but the slides are definitely in front of us.
Okay, good to hear. So technical
that
glitches
looks perfect now. So Kurt, brilliant.
Now.
Back to you.
So it's much better now. Thank you. So vaccinating data against abuse means approaching risks the way they should be approached before accidents happen is one way of doing it. The other way, and this is the one we have chosen, is to accept the likelihood that accidents do happen, accidents like data breaches, the release of private information, data theft, the criminal style of it, data hacks can be criminal, it can be just for fun, but in any way, it's not what the owner of data wants to go through. A data leakage, when the system administrator forgets to tick the right box Friday before he leaves or she leaves, and leaves data vulnerable for the weekend. By the end of the day, regulation has kicked in to resolve all of these issues, and resolving means putting fines against these issues, GDPR being the most exciting of these regulations. And as we see data-driven business all over the place, we even have data-driven countries. Luxembourg is one of these countries. Then you see that the commercial value of data is clearly on the rise, as can be seen in the stock price valuations of Jury's company, for example, Google, and all the other hyperscalers. So data is big business, and big data sort of ecosystems are bringing together data in a collaborative style in order to make analytics work. By the end of the day, this new risk scenario is being approached the traditional way. Traditional versus innovative application means on the left-hand side, you do have the way traditional applications are being built even today. That means upon generation of data, everything goes into one big database. And if you are lucky as a hacker, you walk away with the database, or at least parts of it, or you may lose that data in case of any vulnerability situation. So we think the right way of doing it is on the right-hand side. Innovative applications have to start when data is being generated and put the data into a personal identifiable section, and put the other part of the data, the content data, into the content section and have it stored in independent databases. As a result of it, you end up with lower value data. Only if you bring the data together in an application, you have this situation again where you have everything available. But as data is being stored, you do not have it in this high risk scenario. Of course, what you see on the right-hand side is not rocket science, it's pseudonymization. And pseudonymization has been around for quite a while, but you have to bring pseudonymization from its opaque, traditional project-heavy style into an industrialized format. And this is what Data Vaccinator has been using and is using technology-wise. So if you build applications this style, you end up with applications that separate PID from content data. And as a result, you see the risk vectors in green, which means you do have damage control or the airbag built into the way you manage your data. Pseudonymization upon data generation means you have to do it in real time, which is opposite to what has been done in traditional pseudonymization tools and projects, where you take vulnerable data and make it into less vulnerable one by separating PID and contents. This traditional way, you take a shortcut and take a data vaccinator, and you vaccinate in real time, which means upon generation of data, the data is being separated into PID and into the content part, thereby eliminating these vulnerabilities at the root and right from the beginning. And of course, you keep it separated during lifetime, and you only reunite it upon demand in applications. If you have the right approach, and if you have what we call the minimal footprint approach, then you can take, as a software programmer, the data vaccinator Lego block and put it into any application, which means building a new application can be done with the data vaccinator module just used by the programmer, but you can also re-engineer legacy applications and change the way data is being stored from this one pod into independent databases. We do have flexible operating model simply due to the fact that data vaccinator is fully open source. So it has a server side, which is AGPL. It has a client side, which is MIT license. And as a result, you as a user, you can do whatever you want. If you are a big enough third party, you can do everything by yourself. The storing, obviously, of the two parts, but we also have customers who say we would like the ID service, the PID service, to be provided by a third party. Then this could be an independent third party, independent from the other party that manages the content side. Here is how pseudonymization data vaccinator style works for local applications. Those of you who understand and have used pseudonymization, it's not new. Pseudonymization is a concept that has been well underway for a couple of decades already, but only theoretically. In practice, there are very few pseudonymization projects that have really made it to maturity and breadth of applications, simply for the fact that pseudonymization today is a long process. It's a project-heavy one. The tools that do exist do not do the job, and the job is to simply, how we call it, vaccinate at the source, which means store into two separate databases. And what you do have here is an example rental car application. The rental car application fetches in the data vaccinator database the VID, that is the vaccination ID. And with this vaccination ID, the application, upon authorized users only, of course, goes into the content database and fetches the content information. At this point, I would like to explain how important this can be for the medical side. When we started, or before we started Data Vaccinator, we came across a big data incident in Singapore, where 2 years ago, the medical database of the country was more or less open. It was a very famous application, and the Prime Minister even announced the most innovative and most secure medical records application in the world. And only a couple of weeks later, his medical records were on Facebook. So the building of the application obviously was not done the way it should have been done, by separating both the PID side and the content side. And that example makes clear it's not a big problem if a hacker walks away with the PID side, that is the name and the email address of the Prime Minister, but without the content side, that is his medical record information, an MRT or CT scan, and the other way around. This way of managing pseudonymized data is not new, as I said, but what we have done we have brought it to industrial level and into different usage formats. The following one is one for web applications, where you have a service provider managing the content database, and you have another provider managing the PID, or in the VID terminology, in the data vaccinator terminology, the VID part of information. We have looked at the necessity of processing because for applications it's important that you can, for example, do a search and not bring the whole database into the application, but search, retrieve the VIDs, request user data, and then display it, as we call it, reunite the two databases in the application, but for the authorized user only. And therefore online searching is a key requirement, and you need zero-based knowledge mechanisms to make this searching possible on parcel tokens, for example. Yeah, with this, I'm at the end of the short presentation of Data Vaccinator, and my message to you is vaccinate your data, put the Data Vaccinator module into your apps, and yeah, have an airbag built into the data of your users and your organizations. Thank you.
Thank you, Kurt. And we saw that all very crystal clear. So thank you. So if you do have a question for Kurt, or you'd like to ask a question or have a comment, please pop it in the chat function, and then I can raise them with Kurt directly, or ask you to do the same. We don't have any at the moment, Kurt, so I just wanted to ask perhaps a question from my side to maybe get us going. Was the organizations and companies that you're talking to about this approach, where do you suggest people, or what are you saying to organizations, where should they start if they were to take this approach? What's kind of some of the core kind of first steps or foundations to getting this right, or to getting the tool that you've developed most effective? Where should people start and think about?
It's important to get an understanding about the value of your data first, and everything else is going to be a derivative. So you must understand the value of data that you have, and then it's a derivative, means then you start building it into your architectures. So developing a new application is no big deal. You just take the Data Vaccinator module from GitHub, and you then implement it into your application. We were surprised to get very strong feedback also from organizations which we didn't expect in phase one, like criminal justice, so governmental organizations. Obviously, they have high risk data, the name of the criminal officer and the name of the victim should be handled in separate ways from the content of the criminal deed. And surprised because normally they wouldn't go to just 1 year old organization, datavaccinator.com, has been so successful internally that we decided to spin it off into a separate legal entity, into a company. And yeah, as a result of choosing the open source approach, we could see that the trust you normally need to earn over a decade for these organizations to let you in had already been high enough or big enough for them to give us a ring and sit down and discuss what could be done. Why? There is no dependency, there is no vendor lock-in, and there is no backdoor, because they have the source code and can clearly scan each and everything. And that has been quite a positive surprise for us.
It's fascinating to hear your journey, Kurt, and how this is evolving. And it seems like it's continuing, right? You're only at the beginning of what this can do. Just perhaps come back to a comment. I was struck by a comment that you made at the start of your presentation around the analogy of the road traffic accident and there being airbags, but there not being an airbag in this kind of area or this kind of industry as yet. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that we haven't got this right to date? Or why do you think this is still an issue or still a problem that we're having to deal with? And interested, given your experience in the industry.
It's tradition. So people are used to building applications this way, and therefore this is happening again and again. So tradition can only be challenged if you come up with something completely new and something as easy to manage as a Lego block. And this Lego block approach has been very helpful also to take an example which is still a remote one, but IoT platforms are looking at ways of securing the data and managing the data in a way which makes data owners today the data owners of the future. A key challenge of IoT business is that data ends up with the IoT platform, ends up with a third party that may finally walk away with your business. Take the automotive industry. The automotive industry is highly concerned that by the end of the day, Google's Waymo or some other smart service may be the operating system for each and everything, and they are just spending the metal by the end of the day. So data ownership, as it becomes more important, also becomes more important in this sense of IoT. Now, if you had a mechanism to split the information about, for example, a machine, it doesn't have to be a person. The PID in this example is a VID, could be a machine with an ID, with a location. And if you, as the data owner, had the chance to simply control these aspects, you could, if you want, only hand over to your dear supplier with the smart machine the data that you consider to be not vulnerable for you. Predictive maintenance can also work against you if the supplier of your smart machine is smarter than you as an organization. So that gives control back, but what it needs a Lego block. So if you come with a big application with a big footprint, you cannot run it in an IoT network. IoT networks, from a performance point of view, would only let you in if you can do Raspberry Pi type of application. So on very low performance computers, this is what Data Vaccinator can do today.
Great, Kurt, thank you so much. We have one question which we're running out of time, so Rudolf, I'm going to raise this to Kurt as well. So Kurt, just to finish us off in the last minute or two before we have to close the session off, because I think you've all earned a really, I was about to say a big lunch, but a digital lunch. The question, Kurt, is in the chat: the crucial risk lies in the VID database. What about the security of this database? Where would it be located? Would it fulfill IT security standards such as ISO 27001? Over to you.
The obvious answer is yes. And as it is open source, take the criminal justice example. This is an organization that would probably not let any third party run such PID or VID database. They would do it by themselves or have their house supplier, and these guys have run through all the certifications, including ISO 27001. In other scenarios, we have been asked to run the VID service, which is not a problem because by nature of the encryption protocols that we have developed, we take the service provider out as a knowing third party. So the service provider is just has just to be trusted on the level of being a good 24/7 service provider with a high service level availability, and not having access to data by nature of a secret that is only owned by the owner of the data makes these services less vulnerable as compared to services that do not have this cryptography basis behind.
Great, Kurt, thank you. And I hope, Rudolf, that has answered your question. Well, I'm afraid, Kurt, thank you so much, but we have sadly come to the end of our time, but a brilliant way to end today's deep dive stage. So thank you, Kurt. Thunderous round of applause from everybody virtually, I'm sure. That was a really fascinating presentation into a tool that could really help. So thank you. Great to have you with us, Kurt, and many thanks for your presentation and for answering so many questions. So with that, we have unfortunately come to the end of our time together. I hope, like me, you've really enjoyed the presentations from Kurt, from Yuri, from Waldemar, and from Paul, where we kicked off talking about cloud. Just to say now, this session was going to come to an end, but there is much more at the conference throughout the afternoon. The Bitcoin Privacy Conference this afternoon will be talking about issues such as data ownership, which we just touched on, third country data transfers, GDPR, artificial intelligence and video data, which is going to be a fascinating one. And then a big topic which we've touched on a few times in our session and our time together, global data flows, which I think is going to be on the main stage, which is, of course, a topic that we're all looking at very much right now and seeing where that conversation is going to take us in the direction of travel. So a lot more at the main conference. But with this, I will end the deep dive stage and allow you all to hopefully go and get some lunch, go and have a walk, stretch your legs before the afternoon. Thank you to all our speakers. Thank you to Lennart, who's done wonderful technical support in the background. Thank you, all of you, for all your questions and for your interactions with the session. I'm Sue Daly from Tech UK. It's been my pleasure to be your chair and moderator today. And with that, I will wish you all a very happy rest of your Tuesday, and bye-bye. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.